Listen carefully, or you might think you heard this wrong. In November 2007, Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid kept the Senate technically in session during an actual recess so that President Bush could not make any recess appointments. Last night, Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid decided that he would keep the Senate technically in session during the actual recess so that his own party's president cannot make any recess appointments. In our fourth story, the so-called compromise that is really a precedent-setting cave-in as Senate Democrats slink out the door on their way home. Majority Leader Reid has to agree to schedule pro forma sessions every week for the next 6 weeks while senators are home during recess. That means the Senate will be in session on a technicality. And with the Senate not in recess, President Obama will not be able to make recess appointments. The consequences of that in a moment. In a deal struck with Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, 54 of the administration's 110 pending nominees were confirmed. But the vast majority of those 110 stalled nominees would have been easily confirmed anyway by a simple up or down vote. Except that such votes have been blocked, as these nominees have been held up under a variety of Senate rules that are abused for maximum effect. And Republicans have slowed President Obama's executive and judicial nominees to a degree never before seen. So where's the so-called deal? It gets worse. Minority Leader McConnell had threatened the Democrats with this. Under yet another rather obscure rule, McConnell would have sent Obama's more controversial nominees back to the House, or to the White House, rather. If McConnell had done that, those nominees would have to be resubmitted, slowing the process down even further. McConnell did this very thing in August, 5 of the president's judicial nominees. And if all that seems like a highly lopsided compromise, it may be because of the very nature of Democrats. When asked whether they admired political leaders who compromised or leaders who stuck to their positions without compromise, most Americans in a recent poll said they admired the no-compromise ones. But while Republican respondents in strong numbers were against compromise, Democrats were generally in favor of it, which in practice means that the non-compromisers draw the greatest concessions from the compromisers, not the other way around. Let's turn now to Washington Post staff reporter, Newsweek magazine columnist, and MSNBC contributor Ezra Klein. Ezra, good evening.
How are you?
I'm confused about this. I mean, I thought we had the parameters understood about how broken the Senate actually is. Explain why this indicates that we were narrow-minded in our thinking.
No, the rule about the Senate is as broken as you think it is, wait a week. And this is what we're doing here. So the deal is pretty much as you've described it. There is going to be essentially fake sessions of Congress, of the Senate, for 6 weeks. And there'll be fake sessions of the Senate because if these judicial nominees go 30 days without a vote, McConnell can send them back. And he can then make them go through confirmation, the whole thing, the committee hearings all over again. But in order to do that, it means no recess appointments. And that means that the OMB director can't be put in, who is being held up actually by a Democrat, Mary Landrieu. That means that Larry Diamond, who is going to be on the Federal Reserve and is desperately needed over there, can't be recess appointed, or any of the other 100-odd. So it's really giving up quite a lot for it. Reid's people say they're very happy with the deal, but from the outside, it looks like a pretty strange bargain they struck.
And did they make it because McConnell was basically saying, if you think this confirmation process is stalled, I can make it much, much worse?
They will tell you they made it because this was a terrific deal. They got everything they wanted. They will stick to that, and who knows, maybe they feel that way. But, you know, McConnell and the Republicans have been enormously effective at holding up Obama's nominees. Judicial nominees alone, circuit court judges, they are now waiting 5 times longer on average than they did under George W. Bush. So McConnell is doing pretty well there, and they struck a deal, it seems, to everyone else, so they could get a bunch of the nominees out. About 50-some were confirmed last night. But in return for it, the controversial nominees are held. And these nominees, they're not necessarily all that controversial. I'll note these 59 nominees who were passed with unanimous consent last night, they were held up too. Supposedly they were so controversial, but in fact, they weren't controversial at all when it came down to it.
What would have happened if the majority leader had stood up to the threat?
It's not clear. I mean, in the Senate, the rules are in large part agreements with one another. And you can try to change the rules, and you can simply refuse to honor the agreements. What you're seeing now is something very new happening in judicial, in not just judicial, but nominations generally. This attempt to take recess appointments off of the table. Now that this becomes a norm, now that both parties begin doing this, you now have, on the one hand, a process where you can't confirm nominees, and on the other hand, a process where you can't recess appoint nominees. And what you're going to end up having after that is that talented people are not going to go into government. Good people are not going to go into government. They're going to prefer to do what Elizabeth Warren did if they do go into government, which is get a temporary, non-Senate confirmed and less powerful position, so they don't have to wait a year with no certainty of getting the job. So in the long run, what we're going to have is a much worse government with less talented people in it, because you're not going to be able to attract people into this process.
And Ezra, as if this were not all good enough news, Democrats also agreed to spending cuts to keep the government running through December?
Right. So what was going on there was Republicans essentially threatened a government shutdown in order to get a continuing resolution in which the government would continue being funded until through the recess. They had to agree with the Republicans that they would cut spending somewhat. It is interesting. It's the way of the Senate. The minority has a lot of power, but it is hard to explain to Americans why the majority party has to keep giving away so much. Or
doesn't have any at some times. Ezra Klein of the Washington Post, as always. Thank you, Ezra.
Thank you.